We're going to start with the travelogue. Scott Smith, I just discovered he and I worked in the counseling center concurrently for about a semester or so.
Maybe, yeah, it was quick.
So we have that much in common. And Scott's going to talk about his trip to Alaska, and it's all yours.
Okay, so yes, I spent about 2 years here back in the 80s on a temporary contract kind of a thing. And my wife, Carol, now works here for over 20 years. So I've got a little bit of connection with JCCC. But what I'm here for today is talk about my trip to Alaska. And really, it is more of 28 different adventure days just molded into one oversized trip. Now, the trip itself, I did solo, and that was mainly because when you're looking at being gone for a month, it's hard to have somebody go along that, you start with my group of friends, then you whittle it down to how many ride motorcycles, to how many that want to be gone for a whole month. Came down to 0. So I decided I was going to go and I was just going to go on my own. I'd been on many trips, several trips on my motorcycle, a couple with Carol. But as I was looking at it, trying to figure out what to do next on my trip on my motorcycle, it was like, I want to do something epic. And then I started looking at Alaska, and before I knew it, I was on my way. So I've got a lot that I'm going to cover because I want to obviously look at pictures and the scenery, but I also want to talk a little bit about the experience on the highway, as well as some logistical things of how I managed to cope while I was out there and how I managed my trip. So we're just going to zip right on into it here. And I'm going to skip a few days here, but my trip began last summer on June 16th. And I know that's a Thursday because I see trash cans out behind me here. But that is my Can-Am Spyder. The Can-Am Spyder is a 3-wheeled motorcycle, and it has 2 wheels in the front. So technically it's referred to as a reverse tricycle or reverse trike. And it's real comfortable, easy to travel with. So I had that going for me. And I've been asked if I was a little nervous before I went, and I really wasn't, because I'd planned it for so long that it was just a matter of fact that on this day I am going to Alaska. So I planned to leave at 8 o'clock that day. I left at 8:05 because I needed one more hug and kiss from Carol. And then I was off and on my way. So my first kind of a self-aware moment, I was only north of Kansas City. I hadn't even gotten to St. Joe yet, but I was thinking, I'm going to Alaska. I've got this huge trip ahead of me and I just got started, but the whole idea behind a trip like this is to get started. So I was off and I was running, and I'm going to skip through these first couple of days because they were just highway, getting around Minot, because I took the highway up to Fargo, headed west, and I didn't want to go through a major crossing point. I wanted to get something a little smaller, and that was going to be Portal, North Dakota. So my first day I went to Brookings, South Dakota, then I went to Minot, and now I'm heading on into Canada. And at the time last year, to get into Canada, you had to have 3 things. You had to have your passport, you had to have a immunization card that showed that you had been COVID immunized at least twice, and then you had to put all this information into what was an app called ArriveCan. When I got up here, let me go this way. When I got up to the agent there, all he asked for was my passport. He didn't want any other stuff. So it made it pretty simple. He was all business. And since this is the first time I was ever crossing the border, I just very respectful, and I was through. Now, I didn't have anybody waiting. I was the first one up there, and I wondered why. And then I come to find out that in Minot, I'd left a little early, about an hour earlier than I had planned. I was up, I was awake, figured, let's go. And I didn't realize that Canada is not on daylight savings time. So I got to the gate, when I got to the crossing, it was like 7:30 in the morning. So there wasn't a whole lot going on at 7:30 in the morning in Portal. But when I got there, there was supposed to be a sign somewhere that said, "Welcome to Saskatchewan." And I looked all over for it. I couldn't find it. Then I found myself on a one-way street that was going back to the United States for that border crossing. And it's like, I don't want to go there. So I looked around, I didn't see anybody. So I went back up the wrong way on that one-way street. So I was in Canada for less than 10 minutes and I was already breaking laws, but it was going to be easier to do that than try to go back and get back into Canada and have them ask me why I spent 10 minutes in Canada. Since I missed that sign, I wanted to stop and take my first picture in Canada at someplace really iconic. And I don't know if you ever heard of Tim Hortons or not, but they're kind of like a Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, and maybe even a little bit of Panera Bread all rolled into one. They're hugely enjoyed by Canadians. They love it. It's always busy. The prices are good and reasonable. So Weyburn, Saskatchewan is where I stopped. I also wanted to get some Canadian money, and this was on a Saturday. And I couldn't find, ATMs are everywhere by banks with us. And I found a couple of banks, but no ATMs. But I did finally get some money at a Walmart, is where I got my Canadian money. But I learned to love Tim Hortons, and I stopped there anytime I was in civilization. Going on up to when I went through Portal, I was on just 2-lane road all the way up to Moose Jaw. And I love unique names for towns, and Moose Jaw was certainly unique. And playing on that, they had a big moose there. So I took a picture of him. And they have a running competition with some town in Norway that who has the biggest moose. And right now it does still belong to Moose Jaw. Also, I think it was my very first stop for gas. I was filling up and in Canada, and these guys on Harleys roll up and they start chatting me up a little bit, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wow, I just heard in an actual sentence here. This is pretty cool. So then I went on into use the facilities, use the restroom. And then I found out, well, they don't have restrooms in Canada. They have washrooms. So my first stop, I'm learning about washrooms. So even though I'm in a foreign country, I'm picking up the dialogue and the language really quick. So my first night in Canada was a town called Swift Current. So my first night, I got to eat out. So I'm eating at a little bar and grill kind of place. And in walk all these kids with Royals baseball hats. So when I was done eating, I ran out to my bike, got my Royals hat, came in and chatted him up a little bit. And it just so happened that this young man, this one right here, had been to Kansas City. He had visited Kansas City a couple years earlier with his dad to watch the Toronto Blue Jays, which is a Canadian team, play the Royals. So I'm out on the Trans-Canada Highway heading towards Calgary. It was kind of threat of rain a couple of days here, but there were scattered showers almost all the time. I'd see a storm on the road and it would pass and I would cross wet roads, but I never got rained on. So I did a good job of avoiding that. The Trans-Canada Highway and the Alaska Highway both have good pullouts for you to pull in, but they don't have modern conveniences. So even out here on the Trans-Canada Highway, which is supposed to be one of their major thoroughfares, they only have pit toilets. So they're not for the faint of heart or the sensitive of smell, I can tell you that. So I got to Calgary, and now I wanted to have some adventure along the way, and I mapped out my route to take me through Banff Provincial Parks and Jasper. And so this is just I got gas right before I went on into the park here. And obviously the scenery is really changing here. I've left the Great Plains behind me. One of the first things you'll notice is these little mini tunnels, and they're not really tunnels. What they are, they're animal crossings, wildlife crossings. So you'll pass several of these and they just have them set up so the animals can cross the road and get to the other side. And the scenery is starting to take on a new perspective here. And one thing I learned quickly, because when I stopped here, there was a deer down here in the lower right, but the animals are quicker than I am with my camera, because my camera was just my phone. And by the time I got my gloves off, the cradle off, logged in and got my phone up, they're almost always gone. So it was real tough for me to catch some wildlife pictures. But here you can see that it's mid-June and there's still plenty of snow on the mountains, and the scenery is really starting to pop here. Again, it was kind of a cloudy thread of rain day, but I thought this was pretty nice with the mountain in the cloud cover there. And since Banff was not my destination, it was kind of one of my drive-throughs. But I did want to enjoy some part of it, some aspect of it, instead of just taking pictures. So I chose to walk the Johnston Canyon. The Johnston Canyon has two waterfalls. So the first one out is about 1.5 miles back. And then you go, the further one is about 3 miles out and back. And after being on the bike for 4 or 5 days, it just felt like I needed a good walk. So I decided I would do the Johnston Canyon walk. And being there in mid-June, I think because of rains and still a lot of snow melt, the river was just raging. It probably would be different come August or something, but the river was really fierce. They had a nice walkway along. Now, when I say a nice walkway, it's a dirt path, but that's where the majority of the walkway was just along the walk. But as you got into the canyon, they would anchor the walkway into the sidewall of the canyon. So you're walking along and looking down on the river that is right below you. So they put the walkway right in the canyon. And again, everywhere I went, I bet they had a little waterfall about every 100 yards. It seemed like there was some kind of a waterfall feature that I could stop and take a picture of. And again, this just raging waters here. So this is the first little, the big waterfall that was the called the lower waterfalls. And I don't know if it's natural made or man-made, but there's a little tunnel that you went into and you're standing right by it. So you're getting a little spray there. So that was the top of it. Then I decided to look down a little bit, and then I got out of there. So down here in the lower right, you can see by my elbow is where that little cavern is that you walk through and get a little closer picture. I got up here and there was I assume a tourist couple from India, and he basically asked me to take a picture, in the universal signs of that. And I did, and I got a nice picture of him. So I asked him to take a picture of me next to the waterfall. He did a great job of taking a picture of me in front of the waterfall. So so down there in the lower right is the little cut through that you can kind of get a close picture, but the waterfall itself is right behind me. But I don't know, lost in translation at times. So I continued up the pathway. Again, it was a dirt. Sometimes it was rocky steps, but that was the upper waterfall, which is a little grander than the lower one. And you can see there's still some snow around. Now, it's always fun to people watch. I was walking behind this guy, and this is a tourist area, so there's a fair number of people coming and going. But he's carrying bear spray, so he's going to make sure no bear gets him. And then I walk a little further, and I see not only this guy, but his wife in front of him have backpacks on with cats in them. So they're taking their cats for the tour. So as I was walking, I was thinking, well, what really needs to happen is that guy with the bear spray needs to walk with these guys, because if a bear shows up, he can go eat him. If he's your entree, you get a free appetizer. So anyway, it's just interesting. So now I'm back on the road, and there's a big, long road that goes up the center of Banff and Jasper. And this is Bow Lake. Again, just a real scenic area. You can see there's still some snow around, and there's even some ice still on the lake itself. This is just a snow-packed little mountain area close to Bow Lake. And this is the Weeping Wall. which I thought was really cool. Again, I don't know how it would be in August, but that wall has several waterfalls that you can see that are coming down. And I didn't take many videos. I was not wanting to get into, I wanted to document the trip, but not let it become the overriding need. So I didn't take many videos, but lots of pictures. But I just thought that was a real interesting area. Now, the nice thing about the Banff and Jasper, when you're in the Rockies in Colorado, let's say, you're going up, down, left and right really fast, and you have to kind of look out your window and look up, and even then you usually can't do it because you have to watch the road. What was nice about Banff and Jasper is that the road's in a valley. They call it the Icefield Parkways. And so it's a big wide valley and all the mountains are up on either side of you. So you're driving through just looking left and right, and you're seeing all the mountains in their majesty without any trouble, and you can still drive a flat road. So this will lead up to the Columbia ice fields, and behind the mountain range is just a huge ice field. And then it pushes some of the ice, of course, from the ice field out through the mountains. And so this is getting into their main glacier area. And Athabasca Glacier is the biggest one. And you can get out and walk up here to the toe of the iceberg or glacier if you like. I did not. This was my longest day. And in fact, I made it longer because I took a wrong turn coming out of Lake Louise after I got gas, and it cost me 2 hours. I went an hour out and an hour back. And so anyway, it was already about 6:30 and I still had 2.5 hours in front of me to get to where I wanted to stay. But Banff and Jasper is one of those areas that even if you don't go all the way to Alaska, it's worth the trip in itself. But I would plan to stay 2 or 3 nights because it's so, because they got the Fairmont Hotel or Chateau Fairmont and Lake Louise and all these other areas that are just worth staying. I didn't even go to the little town of Banff. I stayed at Hinton, Alberta, because it was about an hour outside of Jasper to the east, so I can get a reasonable rate of a hotel. And I had no desire to stay up till midnight or to wake myself up at midnight to take a picture down the road. But this was one of my latest nights since I had a long day drive riding. And but it's like 10 o'clock and you can still see it's still plenty of sunshine there. So when I talk about my self-aware moments, this was my next one, because I'm leaving the little town of Hinton. And if I was to go further east, I would get to Edmonton, which is a big city, obviously. And then it has more major roads going on into what's called Dawson Creek, because where I'm heading, that's the start of the Alaska Highway. So, but I'm kind of doing just a smaller 2-lane road up here. And they have a sign on the way out of town that said, next service is 146 kilometers. And so, which is about 90 miles. And when they say next services, that means there is no restaurant, no gas, no people. There's just you, the road, and the trees. So, so I got out there and it's like, I started contemplating how Carol and I talked about me getting a GPS satellite tracker. And at the time I told her, I'm probably only going to have a couple of days where I would really be isolated. I could probably get through that okay. So I didn't want to mess with the time and expense of getting a tracker. But when you're out there in the middle of nowhere, it makes you contemplate your choice. But this is where, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. But I started seeing signs about moose, about caribou crossings and all kinds of things. And I started keeping a good eye out. I didn't see any on this particular leg. But Grand Cache is just a tiny little 3,000 person town. And then it was like another 90 miles to Grand Prairie, which is a good sized town. In fact, it's big enough that it had a Costco. So from Grand Prairie, then I started heading more to the west, started getting up to towards Dawson Creek, and I passed Beaver Lodge. So I had to take a picture of a big beaver to go with my big moose. And I crossed British Columbia. And I finally make it to Dawson Creek. Now, Dawson Creek is where the start of the Alaska Highway is. So I just spent about 6 days on the road to get to the start of the Alaska Highway. And what was kind of fun is I got there and there was a big RV fifth wheeler there taking pictures. So I waited for them to move. And then I pulled my bike in so I can get a picture. And a lady came out with her dog and I asked her if she'd take my picture. She goes, sure. And then she paused for a minute and said, where in Johnson County are you from? I'm going, turns out that she and her husband lived in Overland Park and had just recently retired, moved to Arizona, and were pulling that big fifth wheel up to go see their son, who is at one of the military bases in Alaska. So it's like, oh, small world here. Also, a couple things about, I'm not going to go a lot into because of time, going to my planning and all that, but I had planned that on the 7th day, I would rest. I figure it's sound biblical. It's probably good for me. So that I have a dry pack in the back there, and that dry pack has a week's worth of clothes. So at the end of the week, I just run into the laundry. I just make sure I got a hotel with the laundry and do my laundry once a week. So I only carried clothes for 1 week. Also to save money, because this was back in June when gas was really crazy. And so to save money, I probably only ate out, I would say on an average, about 2 days a week. The rest of the time I was eating in, because most of the hotels still have microwaves and at least a refrigerator. So my little cooler there would carry a few drinks, and then I had deli wraps and deli meats and some trail mix kinds of things for lunch, because when you're out on the road on the highway, Alaska Highway, there's no restaurants. And then when I get into a little town, most time they had groceries. So like in behind me there where it says liquor, that's an old Safeway. So my real big eating times was I would go there, and 3 times I would go to a place that had a rotisserie chicken, and it'd be about $10. So I take it home to the hotel. I would eat maybe the legs and a thigh or something, and then I would pull off all the chicken, put it in some Ziploc bags I brought, and then I would just carry it in my bag. I'd have a bag of salad, puncture it, get it flat, get it in my, and then for the next couple of days, I'd have Caesar salad. One time I bought a bunch of frozen meatballs, and then I had, different things with the meatballs. So I saved a lot of money by eating in. None of these places had breakfast, so I would just have protein bars, and sometimes one time I bought a half dozen hard-boiled eggs, and sometimes I bought yogurt to go along with it. Okay, so I'm at the start of the Alaska Highway. Now, do not leave the town, do not leave Dawson Creek without getting this document here. What this is there's gas on the highway, but you got to know where it is. And they don't have this out. You have to ask for it for some reason. But I knew to ask for it, and I got it because I knew for my bike, 150 miles was about the top end of my comfort level, because about 160, my low fuel light's on. So where all the X's are on the right, those are all about camping, whether it has electricity or whatever, showers over there. Now over here, these 2 columns, the first one is kilometers, the second one's miles. So an example of how I would use it is Dawson Creek is mile 0. I knew that first day I was going to Fort Nelson. So that's 283 miles. So Fort Nelson, I can't make on a tank of gas. I can only go about 150. So I back it up, and then I stop at Fort St. John, which is only 47 miles. So I don't really need gas, but that 47 miles that I put back into my tank gets me to Pink Mountain, which is 140 miles, but now subtract the 47, now I only have to go about 100 miles on my tank. So each night I'm sitting down, mapping out where I'm going, because even from Pink Mountain to Fort Nelson, that was still 140 some miles. So that was going to be the top end, but hopefully I can get gas along the way, because that next column, that GDP where you're seeing is gas diesel, or propane. So I'd have to find a stop. So I'd map that out. So do not go to the Alaska Highway without this document, because they don't have signage. They don't have big advertising signs that said, you know, we got gas 20 miles. We got food 20 miles. No, it's just you and the road once you leave a little town. And where I got my picture taken is the photo op, but the real place is downtown. The Alaska Highway itself does not cover the exact same road that was built in the 40s. As things changed and they started paving and whatnot, they had to alter and move some of this road. And this was just one of the little side trips I made, because this wooden bridge is no longer in service, but it's a well-known bridge on the highway. So I took a little detour, and up until about several years ago, you could still cross it and then meet back up with the highway. They finally closed it because it was starting to show some wear and lose some boards. But it was just one of these classic curved wooden bridges that are pretty rare anymore. When I got gas at Fort St. John, as I mentioned, when I was only 47 miles out, I had been dodging rainstorms for quite some time. But now my luck had run out, because from Fort St. John up to Fort Nelson for those 2 hours, or Pink Mountain, it just poured on me. And I had a rain suit, so my core was pretty good, but I made the mistake because I've got some over boots I put on, and they look kind of dorky because they just cover all things for my boots, but they don't work on my boots very well. I'd have to change it into my sneakers. So it was like, I'm just going to leave my boots off. I'm just going to go, my over boots. So I lived to regret it, because it was like 44 degrees, raining hard. Every time I moved my feet, they were sloshing and cold. So I got to Pink Mountain, got gas, and warmed up a little bit, had some coffee. And by then the rain was subsiding. So this is a good shot of the Alaska Highway, because they've got these big turnouts, and they will probably have, most of the time they have and this is in Canada, pit toilets and bear-proof trash cans. So, and also you'll see that the trees are kept back from the road, so you don't have to worry about animals jumping out at you at the last minute. So it's a nice view, open, but again, they don't say, okay, next stop, 35 miles. No, you just got to wait till you come to it, or you get what's called the mile post, which is a book about all the major roads going up and in Alaska. But there's no signage there that tells you how long to the next one. So I made it to Fort Nelson, and it was still a nice little town, still had good hotels, but 3 remotes to watch TV, it's like, I'm not going there. But when I was unloading my bike, I saw 2 big touring cruisers there, motorcycles. And it just so happened that the guy came out, I chatted him up. Both those couples were from Johnson County, and they had driven their bikes up to go to Alaska. So it's like, holy cow, another, not just from Kansas, but from Johnson County. And I had the one at Dawson Creek. I had those 2, and I had one more in what's called Watson Creek, where I had to eat out. And I saw a little Ford Escape with Johnson County plates, and he must have come out when I was just staring at his car or something. He said, what's that guy doing? And he came out, and he was from Johnson County as well. So I had 4 instances of people from Johnson County. But when I was up there, it's like all of a sudden I'm hearing this siren. It's like, what's going on? You know, because it's not quitting. Usually the sirens come and then they go, and it keeps going, it keeps going. So I look out, and you gotta love these small towns, because on the service road, they had 2 semis pulling trailers with that year's high school graduates. So again, small towns love to play up these moments. So that's a service road. The one right up top is in the middle there. That's actually the Alaska Highway, and then the service road on the other side. So I got a chuckle looking at the high school kids graduating and getting their ride on the trailer. So the next day I'm going to Watson Lake, and I know this is going to be a longer day because there's a couple of things I wanted to do. That area, that whole road is known for metal grate bridges, which make motorcycles a little squirrely because they don't really know where to track. But I finally started seeing my first wildlife. I saw, obviously, a mountain goat and her little baby. And Toad River Lodge was a gas stop I was going to. And it's actually a pretty nice one, but there's nothing else around it. But there was that little building there, and then there were some couple cabins and some RV and camping places down to the left. Now, as far as the gas goes, again, I knew I wanted to stop here for gas, and there is gas, but you don't pull into like a Quick Trip or something big and fancy. So this is where you get the gas at Toad River Lodge. And typically the way it would work most places, now if you were in a little town like Fort Nelson, they would have card readers out at the pump. Here they don't. So what you have to do is you walk into the front desk, give them your card, then you walk back out, pump your gas, and then you come back in and tell them what pump you're on. And most of them were able to look it up. But I had one situation where when I went inside to give him my card, the gentleman followed me out so he could read the pump and know what to charge me. Then we went back in. And another time, and it might have been this one, because they wanted me to take a picture of the pump and bring the picture back in. So there was none of this, you know, just slide it and go or tap your card and go. You had to work with the limitations of technology. So regular gas was $7.20 a gallon there. And that was US prices. So one of the things I did before my trip is I got a second credit card that was foreign transaction fee free. So that way I could make sure I wouldn't get charged extra for all these transactions. Because once I got into Canada, I put everything on that card and kept my $100 Canadian in my pocket as much as I could. My bike normally ran on premium gas, but when they say they have gas, that doesn't mean they got premium. But my bike ran fine on regular. So when I got to these prices, I thought $7.20 for regular is what I'll stay at. Then I made up to another huge provincial park area called Muncho Lake, and it was just amazing how blue the water was. Again, snow-capped mountains, blue waters. I saw some more mountain goats. In fact, there was a little herd, but I just got the shot of the little mama and the baby. And then just north of Muncho Lake was Liard Hot Springs. So this is a natural hot springs. It's in a park area. But one thing I did not tell Carol is that about 20 years ago, a bear mauled a couple people and killed a third. So they upped the security a little bit, you can see here. And they got electric fencing around some of the camping areas and this little hot springs that I'm going to. What was interesting, it was about somewhere between a quarter mile and a half mile walk on this boardwalk. But when you first get in there, it's real marshy looking, real watery marsh looking, but then as soon turns into more of a deciduous forest look. And then they get into a nice area that they've kind of worked out. It costs $5 Canadian to get in. And the exchange rate at the time was 78 cents. So every time I spent $1 Canadian, it was really 78 cents. So when I finished paying for my gas, it was always nice to see it was a little bit less on my charge card. But they had a nice boardwalk area there, nice changing area. The hot springs itself was still pretty natural. They put some smooth pebbles on the floor or on the bottom of the hot springs, I think, just to make it easier to walk and not kick up dirt. But the hot springs came in on the far end. So one of the things people try to do is see how close to the far end they can get and still stand it. But I kind of just hung around down here. That lady on the far left is sitting on a little ledge reading a book. So I went on the other ledge and just sat there and soaked for a little while. So this was the little park that was kind of fun to stop at, have a little soak in a natural hot springs. And then across the highway was the Liard Springs Lodge, and they had gas. So it's like, okay, and I'm going to go over there and get gas. Oh, out of gas. Truck will be here this afternoon. So I didn't really plan on that. So again, you got to know where these places are. So this is one of my first big decisions, because I can go back to Muncho Lake. It would probably take an hour and a half, because I did go through some construction. I had to wait for a pilot car to lead us through. And so it's probably going to be an hour and a half or so, if not two, to go down backwards and come back this way with more gas. There was 2 more gas stations before Watson Lake, and I knew I couldn't make Watson Lake, but there's 2 more. But they were saying the first one I would come to wasn't open, so I'd have to get to this other one. So I still had half a tank, because I was trying to do things, get gas while I can. So I thought about it, and I decided I'm going for it. I think I got enough. I got half a tank. I'm going for it. I'll see what happens. So off I went on one of my big decision makings here. When I got to the north a little bit, there's some wild bison herds up there. They call them the woodland bison. So they come out to graze on the side of the road. One of the things I would always do, especially with the bison or the bears, I would try to get past them. So that way, if they showed an interest in me, I could just hit that throttle and get out of there. So this is kind of looking back. There's a little brown calf. And also with the bison, one of the good reasons to kind of get past them first is that they're known to walk out on the road. And if 2 or 3 get out there on the road and they block you, they're not moving for you. They're going to stand there. So I always like to get past them first, then look back at them and take my pictures, and on we go. But again, almost every picture, you're going to see mountains in the background. Scenery is always spectacular. I did make it to Yukon. And as far as my gas, the first one I went to didn't have a close sign. So I went in and pulled in there, and he said, well, I got gas in my tanks. It's my pumps that aren't working, because these pumps, again, they're the ones you crank over, and, they're old pumps. And he said, I don't know, the technician didn't know when he'd be able to get out here to fix it. So he has gas, but no way to get it up. So I did make it to the next one before my check engine, or my check gas light came on, low gas light came on. So it turned out that my decision making wasn't so bad then. But I finally made it to the Yukon, and just on the other side of the Yukon is Watson Lake. It's a small community, about 800. And at one time it was part of a little military post when they were building the Alaska Highway. So this Air Force Lodge is well known, especially among motorcyclists. So I booked my first room there, or a room there. And it really is an old barracks, probably an old officer's barracks. It was cheap. It was $110, but for my $110, I got this room, So once I crossed into the Yukon, every hotel I stayed at had no air conditioning. So they figured it just never gets hot enough, or I didn't stay at expensive enough hotels. But that was it for $110. So the one thing that is fun to do, so there's not much to do in the room, but the one thing that is known for is what's called the signpost forest. Again, going back to its military post day, they had the story is some guy was hurt and injured. He was rehabbing there, and he was tasked with redoing the directional sign. And he was homesick, of course, up there. So he added his hometown. And before long, everybody's putting their town or their hometown or something there. And there's just acres and acres of these signs. They go on forever. In fact, this is one of my little videos that I took. And some of them are handmade, homemade. Some of them are other signs that people have. And so as you go along here, you're seeing signs. And what do we have here? Oh, we got a sign that I left behind. So I got my own sign there. So don't ask me where to find it if you ever go there, because I have no idea how to get you there, but I left my mark there as well. So that now in the signpost forest, there's 77,000 signs and one more. The next morning, I'm in this little room. There's no coffee unless I want to go into the main receiving area and make it myself. And how barbaric is that? And then there's no Wi-Fi. And that's the other thing. You're going to go to a lot of these places that say they have Wi-Fi, and their Wi-Fi download speed will be like 10 megs. And that's on a good day. Because once 8, 10 people start trying to get on, it just doesn't work. So unless you go to a really expensive place in a decent sized city, you're going to have Wi-Fi advertised, but you're not going to be able to use it. So there's no coffee, no breakfast, no Wi-Fi. So I was up early and I just went ahead and left, got on the road. And this is actually going to be my shortest day. I'm going to Whitehorse, which is the capital of the Yukon. And again, just scenery all the time. You've tried to get to the point where you're not taking it for granted. And this is fairly paved. It looks a little on the gravel dirt road side, but it was paved. And later on, if we get to it, I have a close-up picture of what I'm really riding on. But again, scenery, even though I'm out there in the middle of nowhere, there's always nice pictures. Now I'm getting ready to cross, and I never did learn the proper pronunciation on this bridge, but it's the longest metal grate bridge on the Alaska Highway. And so I got a picture of that, got across it in good shape. And on the right hand side, as you cross the bridge, there's a little hotel and a little gas stop. So I stopped there, walked my cart in, and I saw that they had a little cafe there. So I decided to go in. It was like 10 o'clock. And so I started my day kind of grumpy. But when I had an omelet, a couple cups of coffee, got caffeine in me, the rest of my day changed, and I was happy once again. But that's the longest metal grate bridge. So Whitehorse is the capital of Yukon. But to give you a perspective here, there's about 28,000 people in Whitehorse. Now, where I stopped before at Watson Lake, there's about 800. Where I'm going to go to now is called Dawson City, not to be confused with Dawson Creek. But Dawson City has about 1,500. So we're just going to average about 30,000 people in that location. The rest of the Yukon has 5,000 people in it. So it's vastness, uncharted, unspoiled vastness, because there's only 5,000 people outside of those areas. So I got there way too early because I left early. It was my short day. There's a shot of the city across the Yukon. I went in not thinking my hotel would be ready at 1 o'clock, but it was, because I mainly went in just to see what can I do. They have an old paddle wheel there that they had a tour of, but it was being refurbished, so I can only look at it from the outside. So this is where I departed from the Alaskan Highway. So it continued on to, probably the northwest, about 10 o'clock. And I was going to go more north on what's now called the Yukon Highway, because I wanted to go to Dawson City, even I still make that mistake. And the what's called the Top of the World Highway is what I wanted to ride. And I took this picture because it almost looked like these purple bushes were purposefully planted along the road in some stretches. They were really a nice change of pace and nice scenery. So I'm heading to Dawson City now on the Yukon Highway. Again, I'm kind of out there, but everywhere you look, there's great scenery. There's probably that. I don't know for sure, but I think that's probably the Yukon River again and the other side of it. So there's always, no matter where you are, there's something to see. And I got this one gas stop, and it was, again, a nice isolated gas stop. Went in, decided to get a coffee, walk around a little bit, stretch my legs, and in rolls another Spyder. It's like a kindred spirit. I hadn't seen another Spyder. So went and talked him up. In fact, he was there with a buddy on a Goldwing, and I met them again in Alaska at a town called Tok. And we had dinner together, but he had been to Alaska a couple times before. So they came up from Texas and they just wanted to ride the top of the world highway. So they drove up, rode the highway the next day and got their stickers, and got their t-shirt, went back to Texas the next day. This was the last gas before Dawson City. It was a little unique because it's not at a, it's just a big old oil gas tank, but it did take cards because no one's there to read them. So it was just a big gas tank right in the middle of nowhere, but one I needed. So here, that little black blob on the left, that's a bear. Now that's actually the second bear I saw, because the first one I'm driving along, and the speed limit on the Alaska Highway is 100 kilometers. We're talking about 60, 62 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, a bear's right there next to me. So I hit the brakes, pull around, come up. And again, I kind of get it a little in front of him, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And then pretty soon he loses interest. So that's when I really find out that by the time I got my gloves off, got my phone off the cradle, got my security code entered, got it to the phone app, and then put it up, he was already gone. So this guy, I was going to make sure I got something to prove I've seen bears. So I did stop before I got to him, and I started taking pictures. So my idea was then I would roll up and slowly go by him and take a couple closer shots. Well, I hadn't seen a truck in 15 minutes, but right then a truck comes by, scares this guy into that brush, and it's like, missed my photo op there with him. But when I did go by, I was looking at the brush where I thought he went in. There he was sitting there watching me go by. He was still sitting there. Now, the Yukon Highway had the worst construction, because when they do construction, they rip up everything. It's not just filling in a pothole here and there. They just redo the whole road. And, you know, I want to say it was like 20 miles, but it probably wasn't. It was probably like several miles, but we had to wait for a pilot car, and the pilot car takes this group of cars across it, and it's just dirt and big old rocks the size of your fist. You know, so the bike is wobbling a bit and whatnot, but it's just a mess. And that went on for a few miles, and then they had back to pavement, which was great, then back to construction. So it was a headache. But again, when you're on some of these roads, it's not like you can go, oh, I think I'll go over here and bounce over to State Road 42. And no, there's only one way, so you got to stick with it. And then by sticking with it, I finally got to Dawson City. And Dawson City was an old mining town at one time, and now they only have about 1,500 people. But about 20 years ago, they started really playing up that gold mining era, because so many of the buildings still have that construction. And you'll see that there's no paved roads there. The only paved road was the Yukon Highway coming into town. Then it's all dirt. They don't have sidewalks. They've got boardwalks, but they got a number of hotels and businesses that are under that old style. I did not stay at the Triple J. I was a little more budget oriented. I stayed a little bit outside of town, but I did have dinner under where those umbrellas are. But just a lot of neat architecture, really playing up their history. So after dinner, this is probably one of the coolest things that I saw, even though mountains and scenery were cool. They had what's called the Dome Road. So after dinner, I rode up there, and that was just a really cool overshot of the little town of Dawson City. So the next day I'm going to the top of the world highway, got to get across the Yukon River, but they don't have a bridge. So, Diamond Tooth Gerties, they have a couple things to do in Dawson City that I did not do because I go to bed too early. But at 8:30, this is a gambling hall. You can go play slots or gamble, and they have a can show at 8:30. And there's another hotel that has what's called a sour toe cocktail. So the history is it's a mummified big toe of some miner that lost it, but they'll put it in a shot glass. You got to take the shot, have it touch your lips, or it doesn't count, and then they give you a certificate. And they start at 8:30, and which is a reasonable time. But I just had a hard day getting through all that construction. And I knew I was going to have my hands full at the top of the world highway. So I kept my regular schedule, and I which is usually I'm in bed by 9 or 9:30. So I did not go to Diamond Tooth Gertie's. So anyway, they don't have a bridge, but they have a ferry that's free that you got to get across the Yukon with. And what you'll find is that the current is so strong that it pushes the ferry down. So the ferry doesn't come across to you. It turns around, gets pushed down river, and then makes its way up to you. And the ferry will hold about 8 cars. And usually they put motorcycles on last because they can find a place to squeeze them on. But it's like when he finally got the cars on there, he said, "Oh, sorry, you're a little bigger than I thought." So I didn't get to go that first time, but the next time he let me on first. So again, the current on the Yukon is so strong that it erodes the bank of the landing for the ferry. So they've got dirt movers, bulldozers, cranes on both sides to continually put dirt back on the landing to help get you over there. Now, the top of the world highway, this area is not real jagged, sharp mountains. It's more of the rolling mountains. And they call it the top of the world highway because it goes over the top of these, goes along the crest of these mountains instead of in the valleys. Now, going up, when I got off the ferry, I was going up, there was a sign there that said, road not maintained, drive at your own risk. So I thought, well, that's not very inviting. So, but, on I went, and come to find out when I got up there that the road was really in pretty good shape for a dirt gravel road. And I did pass a grader that was taking care of it. So this was real typical of my scenery up there. Just kind of the rolling hills, rolling green hills. Still had some snow on the north side of some things. And that's a good shot there of the road. It's a gravel road, but it's in pretty good shape. I probably averaged between 35 and 40 miles an hour. And to the border is about 80 miles. So it took me a couple hours to get there. They don't have guardrails except in the real sharpest hairpins, and not knowing how soft some of these shoulders were, and naturally being afraid of heights, I didn't want to get too close. So, but that's a good shot of the road showing how it kind of ribbons along the top of the mountains, not in the valleys. And then I finally came across the border crossing, and what's kind of fun there is it's the most northerly border crossing in the United States. And it's the only border crossing building that's shared by Canada and the United States. Because during the winter, that road's closed anyway, and there's only a few things there. So that's looking back at it. One thing to keep in mind is that Alaska time and Canada time are 2 different times. So you want to make sure that you don't misjudge what time you're getting there and who's on what time. But most northerly border port in the US, and I'm finally in Alaska. Now, about the first 10 miles of the road that I'm on is paved, but then it turns right back to dirt. Because I've got about another hour and a half down to a little place called Chicken, Alaska. But I always like running by streams. It always seems like, I know people have been there before, I like the historical thing. But the hour plus I was on this road, it was worse than top of the world highway. But it finally leads to a little place called Chicken. And this is not a town anymore. There's only a handful of people that live there year round. And it got the name Chicken because when it was a little more thriving of a town back in the mining days, they wanted to call it ptarmigan because of the ptarmigan bird there. But I guess public education hadn't made its way there yet because no one knew how to spell ptarmigan. So they called it Chicken instead. So this is the kind of like the original Chicken. They got a little gift shop, a saloon, a cafe. Around the side, they got the chicken poop. But the power is just run off a big generator. But those 2 people on motorcycles I met in Fort Nelson, here's their 2 motorcycles that are sitting there. And I met them up again. And at that point, they told me about how bad the Alaska highway was at near the border. Because again, I left and went up the Yukon highway to go to Dalton City to ride the top of the world. Now I'm kind of making my way back to the Alaska highway, and they kind of gave me some warnings on that. Some people take the adventures a little differently than I do. There's a Land Cruiser all decked out there. So that's my bike. I'm getting pretty dirty. And my original plan was I kind of wanted to ride the Dalton Highway, which it would take me up to the Arctic Circle. But after my day of riding, the construction the day before, that tired me out on the Yukon, the dirt and the gravel and just the tension I had to use on the road. And then it was paved from Chicken back to the Alaska Highway, but it was the worst road, full of potholes, full of heaves that, it just took the energy right out of me. So at that point, I decided to scrap the Arctic Circle because I originally had 31 days, and that took two days off my list. But I'm feeling pretty worn out. So now I am going from Tok, and the main thing about Alaska is you take the Alaska Highway in, and then you cross the border, and about 90 miles you finally get to Tok, and then the road continues on, kind of like to the northwest a little bit to Fairbanks. Then it drops down straight south to Anchorage, and then back up at an angle to Tok. So it's kind of like a triangle where everything is. So I'm back on the highway. I see a mama moose and her baby there, and they don't seem to pay me too much mind there. But I'm going to Chena Hot Springs because, again, I originally was going to go to the Arctic Circle, but I was so beat up and tired that I worked with Carol because a lot of times, these hotels in these little places aren't on booking.com, and you couldn't use Wi-Fi to find them anyway. So I would call her a lot of times, tell her where I'm going, let her know some of the hotels and whatnot, and then she'd have to call them to make some reservations. But she found me a room at Chena Hot Springs for a couple of nights because it was, again, this is my 6th day on the road, and what better place to spend and get healthy again. So I finally come to the end of the Alaska Highway in Delta Junction. Big mosquitoes, got to take a picture of big mosquitoes. And even the Alaska Highway has some construction, but it's nothing like what I experienced in Canada. But one of the suburbs you can get into is the North Pole. And the whole town plays it up. And there's, of course, a big Santa. And there's a big house there for Santa. And Santa has a reputation for being generous, but he wasn't giving away anything in his house. You had to buy anything there. So I went in to see Santa. He was gone, but that's okay. He knows I'm a good boy anyway, so that was all right. But one of the things that I did while I was there is you can buy a personal letter that you can send to your kids. So last Christmas, my one granddaughter would be 2.5, one would be 6 months. So they had baby's first Christmas and a toddler. Perfect. So I filled it out. I bought them. The only thing is I had to wait for my surprise for my letter from Santa to reach my granddaughters for 6 months. So I wait 6 months, and they started sending them out in December. So December 1st rolls around. They're going to get those little surprise letters from Santa. And 1 week goes by, and my son or daughter-in-law don't say anything. And 2 weeks go by, and they don't say anything. I'm starting to go, did I put the wrong address? What's up here? So it's only a few days before Christmas. So I finally have to break down. He said, my son, Jordan, did you get these letters from Santa? Because I had them sent from the North Pole. They're going to be postmarked from the North Pole from Santa. And he goes, no, let me check with Jessie, my daughter-in-law. Come to find out that, yes, she had received them, but she thought that was junk mail or solicitors and threw them away. So, man, I can't believe you threw away my letters to Santa. So while Santa knows I'm a good boy, Jesse took a step toward the naughty list last year. And there's a reindeer waiting for his 1 day a year job. Oh, when I came out of Tok, I could smell smoke in the air. And the closer I got to Fairbanks, the thicker and heavier it became. And it turned out they were having tons of wildfires out in the forest. So when I got to Fairbanks, it was thick. In fact, after a while, it was burning my nose, my throat, my eyes. But it was thick smoke. People were wearing masks, probably not because of COVID, but because of this heavy smoke from the forest fires. I did want to do something there, so I went to the Museum of the North, It's a relatively small museum, but I got to see cultural, preserved specimens, whales. And I did go to a Costco to get a few more supply kinds of things. And the surprising thing is they weren't that much more expensive than the lower 48. I would say they were probably about 10 to 15% more, and that was all. They even had a $5 chicken, which I bought. The grocery stores were outrageously expensive, but Costco was really pretty good. So Chena Hot Springs is about another hour and 15 minutes northeast of Fairbanks. And you can tell it's an older facility, but they're doing their best to keep it up. Art, flowers. This was a little quadplex, so my room, and it was only $105, was in the lower left there with the box fan. They have a hot springs. Now their hot springs is a little more manipulated, whereas Liard was totally natural. They have a natural springs there, but they do pipe in cold water to keep it at the same temperature. So they regulate it a little bit more, and they landscaped around it a little bit. That little walkway there that's indoor goes back to an indoor pool, and they even have a hot springs, or not hot springs, but a hot tub. But the hot springs are hotter than the hot tub. So my treat Carol talked me into was to get a massage, which was really nice. Kind of get those knots out of my shoulders and arms. And then again, the greenhouses, they did a lot of natural kind of stuff there. This was kind of a cool thing there on grounds. It was an ice museum. They keep the interior at 28 degrees. They've got a master carver that has a shop there that comes in and creates everything. And then inside, he has some of his sculptures. That's a near life-size jousting. There was a tunnel back to where they have a couple of bedrooms that you can rent. They have no facilities, so you have to make a run outside to another building if you need to use the restroom, but you can stay there if you want. And so all this is hand carved. The only thing that wasn't was they have plexiglass along the bar just to keep you from put your grubby mitts on it and melting ice, and then a little seat cushions there. They do give you little jackets, little coats to wear, and for an extra $15, I got myself a little Appletini to celebrate with. And tradition is you take it outside and smash it and make a wish and smash it, but I just left mine on the container garden and just let it contemplate its last moments there. So now I'm heading down to Talkeetna. So I'm coming up down south, and I didn't take a lot of pictures because again, there was still some smoke in the air. And I did not stop at Denali because people go to Denali to see the mountains. Well, I'm seeing lots of mountains. They go to Denali to see wildlife, and I'm seeing bison, bear, fox, moose like crazy. So I didn't really feel a big need to have to stop there at Denali. But coming down, there's still, and this was another moose I saw, and he stayed around long enough, and I felt comfortable enough after it got a couple of pictures to take a little video clip of him. And then I finally get down to Talkeetna, and Talkeetna is a little town, and the cruise lines have really built it up. They can now have a place to stop as they take passengers from the cruise ports on up to Denali. And so I get there, and I'm staying in this guy's, basically his backyard. He's got a stretch of about 5 or 6 hotel rooms he rents out. And as I'm leaving to go walk down here to see what Talkeetna is all about, this guy stops me, and he's from Wisconsin, but his daughter is going to KU. So we talk a little bit about Lawrence and Kansas City. And he said, oh, and I was actually in your room because he was waiting for a ride that the owner was going to take him back to the train station to get back to Anchorage. And he said, I left a couple of beers in the fridge for you. I was like, great, because sometimes having a beer after a long day on the road was really nice, but I didn't have room on my bike to carry it. So I went on down here to the main street, and they've got crafts and artisan things and local brewery. Denali Brewing Company is always a good thing to have. But I really like this picture because it's about 5, 6 o'clock at night. And you can see these 3 guys on the porch and this guy up front. You can tell their husbands that have had enough shopping for the day. We're done. The wives are probably in, still going at it, but he's like, we're done. We're tired. And the owner of that little hotel I was staying at, lodge probably, recommended I eat at the salmon spot, and I did. And it was even better than the salmon burger that I had at the Chena Hot Springs Resort. And she's not overland biker, but it reminded me that I was surprised at how many bicyclists I saw on the Icefield Parkways. I saw a handful out on the Trans-Canada Highway and even up on the Alaska Highway. I was surprised. But anyway, I finally get back to my hotel. I met the owner outside, and he says, "Oh yeah, and so said that I got some beers in there, unless the cleaning lady took them." Well, the cleaning lady. So I didn't even think of that. So I ran in, and sure enough, they were gone. But I guess cleaning ladies like cereal malt beverages as much as I. But by then I was too tired. I didn't want to walk back down to. So now I'm going down to Homer Spit, and there's really not much. You kind of get into the things with suburbs and whatnot, Anchorage. Once you get past Anchorage, you're going around the turning an arm, and you're seeing the bay that leads into it. And once again, it's just amazing. The mountains, the waters. I'm on Kenai Peninsula now, and I don't know if I love or need caffeine in the afternoon. And I was glad to see I finally found a little roadside coffee shop. And now I'm on the Kenai Peninsula looking back across it to the mainland. And this was the most expensive motel I stayed at. It was $225. And but the view was they had 2 strips. They had the lower and then mine. But they had great view and you had a private little balcony, porch balcony off the back, and that was my room for $225. So then I got cleaned up and ran down to Homer Spit, halibut capital of the world. And of course, they have charters to go out and fish and get halibut. Salty Dog Saloon is a real biggie. Been there since the 50s. And one of the notoriety things about it is people put their names on dollar bills and stick them to the ceiling. It was probably the most touristy place I visited. And I don't know if that was because it's a touristy place or because it was 4th of July weekend, but there was a lot of people there. But they have lots of shops and gifts and restaurants. So I figured, okay, this will be one of my times I eat out, because if I'm at the halibut capital of the world, I got to eat something halibut. So I found this place, went in, and they had halibut and chips and fries, kind of a thing. So for my halibut and a handful of fries, a little dish of coleslaw and my beer, once I add tax and tips, that was $55. So probably another good reason why I saved a lot of money by not eating out. But that was $55. But I had halibut in Homer Spit. And on the spit that goes out, back behind me are tons of RVs that are parked. But on this side, you can tent camp for free. So I'm not sure where the facilities are once you're out there, but that's a heck of a place to camp for free. Going back now, I'm heading off. I came in from Tok, went up to Fairbanks and Chena, came down. Now I'm going back up the part of the triangle I have not ridden yet. I'm just going through suburbs and stuff in the city, but I did stop at Walmart, probably just for something. And while a lot of Walmarts are no longer selling firearms, that's not a problem in Alaska. So I'm going on to Tok, again, passing scenery that I hadn't seen before. And I wish I'd remembered this, because I saved 2 days by not going to the Arctic Circle, and I saved another day because I originally had wanted to go to Seward. But I only booked out hotel rooms about 2 days in advance because I never knew what was going to happen. So what I really wanted to do in Seward was go on a little boat ride, ferry ride, and look at wildlife and seals and stuff. And they were booked up for 2 weeks. I couldn't get there, so I canceled them off my list. So I wish I had forgotten about the Mananuska glacier, but it's a huge glacier and it's privately owned. They do take tours for people out there if you want to go out there and walk and drink some glacier water. So again, some more there. Glen Allen was a gas stop and they had a little airport, and again, just beautiful scenery. This is back at Toke, and this is where I washed my bike when I got off the top of the world highway way back when. So I brushed her up again. And this, originally I stayed at a little motel that's on the grounds there, but they were full. So I went to this little cabin, and it was a kind of a nice way to spend my last night in Alaska. So they have a restaurant there. So I went back over to the restaurant, and remembering what those other motorcyclists told me about how bad the road was, I thought, well, while I'm waiting for my food, I'm going to check this out and see if there's any update on the construction, see what's going on, see if they're doing anything. And I'm getting on there, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness. The Alaska Highway is washed out and closed. And again, there's only one Alaska Highway. There's only one road in. How am I going to get home? So I got back to my cabin. I called up Carol, and she's 3 hours ahead of me. And I kept the poor thing up till after midnight, her time, because I had to find a way to get home. And the fortunate thing is this washout occurred about 40 miles south of Watson Lake. So Watson Lake is where you first get into the Yukon. And from there, if you go to the east side of the Rockies, it's the Alaska Highway. If you go to the west side, it's the Cassiar Highway. And then the washout was about 40 miles south. So I can get to Watson Lake and then the Cassiar Highway. But it's even less developed than the Alaska Highway. So I would, on my phone, because again, the Wi-Fi was at the restaurant, which was between, and the hotel was between us, and I was way out here, so it didn't work. So I'd do some things on my phone, map out how far I could go, where the little towns were, where I could find lodging, and I'd call Carol, and we'd even drop every now and then, but she would then call, and she would say that the person on the Cassiar at the hotel would say, oh yeah, it's a zoo. We got people sleeping in their cars. We got people sleeping in sleeping bags on our porches. It's just crazy because, you know, the thing got closed. So it's like, okay, well, I kept her up till after midnight. But what we got worked out is if I stay 2 nights in Watson Lake, that lined up 3 consecutive days where I can get hotels and then get across the Banff. And so it was going to take me 2 extra days, but at least I knew I could be moving and get home. And so what had happened is this little fella here had a beaver dam, and they had some rain, and the beaver dam finally gave way. All that water rushed down at once and washed the road out. So I'm still 2 days from Watson Lake. So now I'm heading down to Haines Junction, Yukon, and had to take a foot on both sides there, boundary, and again, some mountains. So this is a shot of the road. So when some of it looks like it's gravel, it's not much better than that. And that's why if you do the Alaska Highway, you want to make sure you have good tires. Don't think you're going to just stop and get some new tires somewhere, because they're probably not going to have them. And then you got to wait a week for them to get up there. So make sure if you go up there, you have good tires, because this is just chip seal stuff with just rocks embedded in the pavement. Destruction Bay, scenic lake area. Why it's called a bay when it's a landlocked lake, I do not know. And then I get to Haines Junction, which is just kind of a little crossroads area. But again, you look around and it's like, well, they certainly have the scenery. And that's a little strip hotel. And that's kind of like what was at Toke the first night when I was in Talkeetna. They just, I guess people think, well, I'm just going to go into the hotel business, and they build these little strips of 5, 6 hotels rooms and go at it. And here, she had free Wi-Fi for the first like 5 megs. After that, you had to start paying. Well, 5 megs doesn't download a lot, but I did check first thing the Alaska Highway. So I was real curious about how things had gone. Amazingly, they had a detour. Now, because it had actually washed out a few days before I found out about it. So they had time. And remember how I said that bridge earlier was on the original, but they had moved the road. The same situation occurred with the highway right there, is that they found just a little bit off the main road was the old original dirt road. So they plowed through to it and came back. So I didn't know how long the detour was going to take, but I knew it was going to be shorter than 2 days. So I called up Carol, who then had to call these people and say, no, he's not coming after all. But I didn't want to take, again, it was going to be quicker than 2 days to get there. So I leave Hayes Junction, heading to Watson Lake. A little rain in the distance didn't bother me. And I don't know if it was just later in the summer, because now I'm about 2 weeks later, but I'm going past that same place on the bridge I pointed out, this Yukon motel where I had gas and some breakfast at one time. But now I'm seeing a lot more bunches of motorcycles coming up. So I don't know if it's because I'm going south now and they're all going north, or it's the time of season, they get more traffic, but maybe in addition to the fact that the highway was closed and all these people backed up. And when they finally opened it up, they all came at once. But I saw a lot more motorcycle traffic, even a lot more RV. Now this was on the other side of that Metal Great Bridge where people would stop for lunch. But as I was heading into Watson Lake, I was still out, 45 minutes, and I saw smoke in the air. And sure enough, there was a wildfire out there going. And I saw some great moments where fire was just leaping up. And I didn't want to stay at the Air Force Lodge again. I had my experience there, so I upped my ante. And if you've ever wondered where your 1980s waterbed furniture went, it's to the Yukon. Because you could see it's just and my bed's a king bed, and it's got probably a queen or a double headboard there. It's too big for that, but at least I had room to move around. And then, so now I'm heading south again. I pass another herd of bison. And this is where I stopped to get gas on the way south. And this is where I was able to get gas on the way up when I was low on gas. And I was leaving, I stopped and turned and took a picture of it because this is where the gentleman came out, watched me pump, and then went back in to ring it up. But it's like, he's older than I am. And this is probably their house and their little business there. But it's like when he finally leaves it, who's going to be there to make it continue? Because I don't see a young family going out there to run a gas station with little pumps that probably just make enough subsistence on. I don't know. But I was thankful they were there. So on the way back, once bitten, twice shy. I went ahead and filled up gas there just in case there was a problem at Liard. And then this was the detour to get around. It's still up ahead and around the bend there, but to get around that. Muncho Lake again, turquoise waters, just beautiful. I decided I was going to stop at this place. This is their big name hotel in Muncho. But after I paid $8.38 for gas and I bought a coffee, a little 10-ounce cup with maybe 8 ounces in it, I decided just to pull out my wraps and had a deli sandwich. A great bridge. I'm finally back to Pink Mountain where it had rained on me the time before. And as I'm pulling up, I see something taped to that gas pump and it says cash only. So fortunately, when I had stopped at Weyburn, I got $100 Canadian out. I still had $60. So I went in and my tank was and a coffee was $40 Canadian. So I still had $20 left. So but that would get me to Fort St. John, which was a big town. So if I needed to pull more cash, I could. And when I got to Fort St. John, pumps were working again fine. So that was good. But I was just looking at this, that it says cash only, and somebody paid $175.01 Canadian. It's like, holy cow. Work camps were coming because there's nobody out there. So they got to have places to house. This is just another pullover. But when I got back to Dawson City or Dawson Creek, I keep mixing those up myself. I didn't have any trouble getting up there to get my picture, but the RVs are starting to pile up. So the rest of the way was just kind of eventful to some degree, but we're kind of short on time. But I can tell you that somebody's probably say, well, what it cost you? Well, it was about $6,500 for everything as far as gas, hotels, restaurants, whatever it might be. It was about $6,500 for 28 days out on the road, which was, in my mind, fairly reasonable. And it gave me the experience of a lifetime and that epic trip I was looking for. So I appreciate you staying around and kind of seeing my trip, and hopefully you guys can experience something like that of your own sometime soon.
If there are any questions, I can hand you the microphone and.
Everything looks so clean. There was no litter on the highways. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Now,
I mean, I'm
it
amazed.
was, you got to figure there's not that many people going through there anyway. But at any of the pullouts that you had in Canada, at least, they had bear-proof trash container as well. The few pullouts that I came across in Alaska didn't have anything. It was just a pullout just to take a breather, or if you had an RV, I guess, spend the night.
Oh, go ahead. Did you feel safe or unsafe at any time?
No, not. It was good. Everything, the main thing was initially making sure that my bike ran well, because there aren't, once you leave Edmonton was the farthest north they had a Can-Am dealer that could fix my bike. From then on, I was just relying on the preparation, the maintenance and everything I had done to the bike, keep me going. So that was my only real worry initially, but then it ran so well, I soon lost that. So no. I stayed in a hotel room, so I wasn't out in a camp tent waiting for a bear to get me. I would do it again, but I would say I'd probably want to do it with, maybe another buddy, or I don't know that I want to do it exactly the same, because the first time went so well, I don't need to do it again. But if I had another chance to experience the same thing, but maybe a little differently with somebody else, or a little differently, I would.
Did you put new tires on your bike when you got home? Because those roads look really rough.
Well, that was one of the problems. Is I left June 16th. I really had scheduled June 15th. But when I had my bike serviced a couple of weeks earlier, they said, well, you're going to need new tires. And the stock tires only are rated for 8,000 miles. And I ended up going 8,950 miles. So when I talked about, I didn't want to put 8,000 mile tires on my bike, even new, I couldn't make it. So I had to go down to Springfield to get to a guy that would put non-stock tires. He wasn't a dealer, to make sure I had enough tread wear to get to Alaska and back. So that's why I left the 16th, but I had originally planned the 15th.
Any questions?
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share.